What is the number one key to gaining muscle? Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. All right, at the end of the day, it comes down to one thing. It's not even always about intensity. It's not even always about volume. It's not even always about exercise selection. Now, do those things matter? Yes, absolutely. They are all part of the equation. However, at the end of the day, progressive overload is the driver of muscle growth. Okay, that is the driver of your gains. And I don't care what else is going on. Without progressive tension overload on the muscles, you are not going to see any muscle growth unless you are using magical supplements. And you guys know what I mean. I'm not talking about stuff you buy at the regular store. Unless those are in the equation, without progressive overload, we don't really see muscle growth. It just doesn't happen to any meaningful extent, no matter what else you are doing, okay? And on top of that, even if that is the case, you're still going to get a lot better gains with progressive overload. And so what do I mean by progressive overload? Okay? What do I mean by progressive overload? I mean that over periods of time, your muscles have to be subjected to more tension. Okay, so when we say that, people say, oh, so if I can just get more weight on the bar through any means necessary, I'm going to have progressive overload. And the answer is, well, no, not necessarily. Because are you cheating the weight up? Are you skipping the bottom of an exercise? Are you bouncing the weight? You see where I'm going? I mean, if you're doing all of those things, then no, you're not necessarily getting more progressive overload. And we need to keep in mind when we're talking about this, we're talking about tension on individual muscle fibers. Okay, that's kind of relevant. It's not just what's happening just at the tendon. What we mean by progressive overload and mechanical tension on a muscle fiber, we mean that muscle fibers get fatigued. Okay, so you also need to understand it's a little more complicated than that. We have to create fatigue at the level of the muscle fibers that we want to grow. Okay, and oftentimes that means there's a lot of stuff with rate coding and everything happening with different muscle fiber types, which is, I think, way too much for the average new person to really understand. So what we are essentially looking at when we talk about progressive overload is, are the muscles themselves doing more work over time? In other words, while being in a similar range of motion, similar joint angles, okay, is that muscle doing more work? So that's what we mean by, well, if you're cutting ranges of motion, you're cheating, you're bouncing, well, the muscle's not doing more work. But does it always just mean increase on and weight on the bar or the machine? No, it can be an increase in reps. Okay, in other words, if you can only do 7 or 8 reps with a weight, right? Let's say you got 100 pounds, right? I don't care what the exercise is, 100 pounds. And you're struggling with 7 or 8 reps and it gets really hard, but you build up to 10. Have you had progressive overload? Yes. Have you fatigued more muscle fibers, most likely, especially those higher threshold ones? Over time by doing that, you created more tension on more total muscle fibers. And I'm going to say probably yes. Okay. So if that's happening, we're in a good place, right? We're seeing progressive overload. But the problem is people will then say, oh, well, can I just infinitely add reps? And it's like, well, hypothetically, but no, not really. I mean, not really. You're going to reach a point, and I debate this often. People are like, but some of these studies do show really high reps. Yeah, but that doesn't work as well as you would think. It's one of those hypothetical kind of proven in the lab things, but the practice in the real world, it's very difficult to just keep adding reps. When we start getting up to about 20 plus reps, here's what we find. Oftentimes progress goes down or starts stalling as far as the progressive overload because they burn so much that we terminate them short. And what we really find is that if we're not within a few reps of failure, we don't really stimulate muscle growth because we don't fatigue all the muscle fibers enough to get tension on the muscle fibers that can grow enough. Because keep in mind, over time, guess what? not all of our muscle fibers will grow. The longer we train, the fewer muscle fibers we have that are capable of growing. And a lot of times we get down to that point where only those deepest muscle fibers will grow at all. Like once you've been training 3, 4, 5 years really hard, almost all your growth is only coming from about 5% of your muscle fibers or less. Majority of them aren't growing anymore. They won't grow anymore because only those specific type 2 fibers have infinite growth potential. So what ends up happening, we get really high. What happens if you are actually capable of doing 35 reps and it starts burning so bad that you have to quit at 27? Ooh. You don't grow from it. That's the problem with infinitely adding reps. You will stop growing by keeping the reps a little more moderate. And for most people, that's going to be probably capping out at about 12, maybe 14 to 15 for some people. Some people really, I kind of tell them about that 8 to 10, 8 to 12 rep range. Usually a really good spot. And I'm not saying we can't gain higher or lower. We can definitely gain in both. We kind of get to that point to where that's, for most people, that's kind of a sweet spot between the ability to progress without either creating excessive just burning and fatigue on the volume end, or it getting so heavy that we do start to have some joint problems and get beat up. And I am all for, by the way, us doing some really heavy work every week. I do it. I do 1s, I do 3s, I do 5s. But that really should, is once you've been training a little while, that should comprise a little smaller amount. So, but the point is with all of this, yes, a lot of these things matter, but we do need tension. And should we be training to failure or close to failure? So again, that intensity, yes, we should. Should we be training with sufficient volume? Yes. Should we just be adding infinite volume, hoping to get there? Probably not. Again, we run into a lot of problems with that, and I'm fully aware a lot of people do that. A lot of coaches endorse that. It's more trouble than it's worth at the end of the day, because before long you're spending hours and hours at the gym that you don't need when you could have just trained harder. So we're not saying the volume doesn't matter. We're not saying the higher intensity doesn't matter. We're not saying exercise selection doesn't matter. It all matters. Okay? These things matter. Yes, picking the right exercise, the right combinations of exercises goes a long way. But without progressive overload, most of it isn't going to matter enough. That progressive overload is really your key. That is the key to making it all work. And that really is where your focus needs to be, irrespective of all these other factors. Because again, they're important, but they're of secondary consideration. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative. I'll talk to you guys